Over time, our society has witnessed multiple evolutions and revolutions in work and industry, starting with the invention of the steam engine, which led to the usage of electricity as power, culminating into the information age. Recently at Davos, world leaders got together and discussed the coming fourth industrial revolution. Revolution that will be powered by, among other things, artificial intelligence, blockchain, Internet of Things, even some more interesting technologies such as biotechnology, nanotechnology, and quantum computing, certainly in the early stages of these. These technologies, though, as they evolve, are going to start to blur the lines between digital, physical, and biological domains, eventually even challenging us to define what it means to be human. So with that, we want to think about how the forthcoming industrial revolution is going to really enable some new experiences and transform the way that we work and transform our industries. Our talk today is focused on a central question. Should we build machines to be like us, or should we build machines that make us better? And that may seem like a question that has two sides of the same coin. We're going to get into some examples and where we show that's not always the case, and that there is a high level of subjectivity about what better means. So in order to take advantage of this technology, we need to be thoughtful in how we apply it, unlike any other technology that's come before it. Recently, Microsoft talked about, on an earnings call, the potential for them to introduce a flawed AI into one of their products or services. Microsoft, one of the biggest, most successful organizations in the technology space, is having outward communications with its investors and its analysts about negative potential from a technology that they are all in on. And I only bring that up so that we all understand that we should take heed in how fast we run down this road, and we should be thoughtful and thinking about the humans along every step of the way. So towards the end of the talk, we're going to address 3 areas in which we think you can use to get started to make sure that you're developing for the human experience and not just for the machine. But first, let's define what it means to be human.
What does it mean to really be human? If you ask a biologist, they may give you an answer that it's the 5 senses that we have. We can see things, we can communicate with people with our voice, we understand, we have culture, we can talk to one another across geographies. But if you ask a psychologist, they're going to answer something a little deeper. They may say it's intuition, that we predict and we can perceive what might happen next. Maybe it's our ability to just have survival instincts. We have a will to live and we can act on a split second. It could be that it's our ability to develop emotion and develop a right and a wrong and have this sense of morality and use that to influence our decision making. They may even answer something a little deeper still, that it's we are who we are, we exist. And because of that, we have a role to play in the world that's around us. What's even more interesting is you can use this same definition and framework to actually explain what is artificial intelligence.
You can apply the same framework that we just talked about to describe humans to AI. AI today exists in a couple different categories that are commonly used. Narrow AI is the ability for machines to perform narrow tasks. So narrow AI can be things like machines that can observe or with vision. So that is image processing applications. So whether that's facial recognition in a security application or being able to analyze cancer cells in pathology using image processing. Narrow AI also communicates with natural language. So that could be, is mainstream today with a lot of our virtual assistants. Narrow AI can also understand with logic and reason or have inference. There are a lot of machine learning applications, whether that's supervised or unsupervised learning, that exist that demonstrate narrow AI's ability to have these attributes. So machine learning in sales forecasting, or machine learning that in marketing that could do churn analysis, can do channel attribution, or customer segmentation. Well, where narrow AI performs a narrow task, artificial general intelligence, or AGI, is really that personification of some of those psychological traits that Miheer talked about. So it's really talking about AI that doesn't exist today, but that could potentially use or demonstrate our ability to have self-awareness. So it's really sentience. And it's talking about the ability to possess human attributes like, or demonstrate human attributes like feeling and emotion. So with all of that knowledge in mind, there's this evolution that's occurring and this rapid pace of change in AI in narrow AI. I think we can all agree that all of this change is occurring very rapidly. So with all of that described, let's get back to our central question. So should we build machines to be like us, or should we build machines that better us in some way? We're going to talk about some examples that are decidedly machines trying to be like us, and other examples that kind of talk about both being like us and things that make us better. So I'm going to start with this Hanson Robotics' latest human-like robot, Sophia the robot. How many of you have heard of Sophia the robot? A few. Yeah. Yeah, and if you see a few chuckles, it's okay to laugh. You may have watched some YouTube clips of her on interviews on CNBC, or you can actually hire her, as Rob tells me, to be at your next cocktail party. All of that said, as Hanson Robotics would describe her, she's really a personification of their hopes and dreams for the future of AI. So their dreams truly are to build sentience. They truly want to emulate all of us. And there's a quote up there from David Hanson, who's the founder and CEO of Hanson Robotics. And I'm going to paraphrase it in case you can't read it from the back. But essentially what he's stating is, we as humans possess all these wonderful things like compassion, like the ability to love, to demonstrate genius or brilliance. Why wouldn't we want our robots to be able to do those very same things, or be able to interact with us in those very same ways? Well, that's a really interesting question. But in the ways that AI is evolving, the question that then leads to is, how are we going to do just those things and prevent these sentients from demonstrating our more malevolent and malicious attributes, right? So where's the control there? How do we do that? So these are things that we grapple with as we see this rapid change. And these are things that we're going to explore in the remainder of our talk.
So we're going to switch gears to medical and healthcare, which might be familiar to many of you in this room. So who here has taken an eye exam before? Good. I'm seeing a few hands down, so make sure you do that this year. I'm going to bear with me for a brief activity. Take both your hands out, cover both your eyes real quick. What you're kind of experiencing at a high level is pretty much total vision loss or blindness. You can take your hands back off your eyes now, but this is an affliction. It affects 300 million people worldwide right now are affected by some form of eye disease. Now, it's not always complete vision loss like we just experienced, but things like a corneal abrasion, you might have a cataract, blurry vision, macular degeneration. Those of you with older relatives may recognize some of these terms. They're all forms of eye disease. Now, what you may not know is at the doctor's office, in this case, the eye clinic you may go to, they usually do an OCT scan. So as you can see on the left and the right side on the screen it actually scans that full retinal image, and by using that, you can actually analyze and search for eye disease. What you may not know is in the last couple of years, DeepMind has partnered with the largest ocular research and hospital in the country called Moorfields Eye Hospital. And so what they did is they trained an OCT with essentially 50,000 different scans and diagnoses, and they taught it what kinds of diseases mean what kinds of thickness and vice versa. And by doing so, the machine can now do a couple of things. If you think of the eye professional in this case, what they're doing is they have to spend 2 hours, 1 hour, all this time after you leave the room to figure out what was going on with the data. And now the machine does it for them. It tells them severity. So do you need to come back right away in an hour to go to the ER? Maybe you can wait a week or two and you can have just a normal checkup. It tells you different diagnoses and what likelihood they may have. And so now they can focus on the diagnosis and possibly treatment. It also does a lot of the pre-work like cropping images, scanning them, putting them in the right colors, things that a technician would otherwise have to do. And because of it, you can actually use this to triage. For me personally, my family has a history of eye disease, and were this kind of machine more accessible, you can diagnose more things. My fiance is actually an optometrist as well. She would love to spend more time with this machine, but she doesn't have 15 minutes per patient. She already sees 30 patients a day. So how can she help scale out that type of expertise using an AI to help support it? So from here, we're going to switch to an example that hopefully is a little more familiar to some of you in this room, and we're going to look at the transportation industry.
Gotta let it play out. Self-driving cars, autonomous vehicles, driverless cars, many names for the same technology. And some of this already exists today in vehicles, at least in early forms. What we're seeing, though, is an active set of pilots happening on over 17 US cities today. And honestly, this technology can't come soon enough. Every year, 37,000 people die on American roadways alone. Millions more are injured. The economic impact, not only of those deaths and personal property destruction, but also lost productivity, runs into the hundreds of billions of dollars. So we have a moral imperative to fix our roadways, and AI is absolutely a solution that could help us do that. And when you consider the dangers of driving, I think we could all agree this is a point and an experience in which we want the machines to be better than us. Remove us from behind the driver, behind the wheel and out of the driver's seat into the back seat. I would also posit that today's transportation industry is actually heavily biased, and I'll explain that in a minute. But what I will say is the economics of transportation fundamentally changed with driverless cars. These cars are typically electric vehicles. They have low maintenance cycles, high availability. They can be deployed in fleets and in mass to all parts of the country and all geographies. They can be reallocated based on demand, and we could better predict demand based on other artificial intelligence algorithms as well. So this is an entire system of AIs working to fundamentally transform mobility and as many Americans would agree, freedom. As I mentioned, though, I think there is a bias here. I'll tell a story that'll illustrate that. My daughter, Ashley, who's 15, suffers from a condition known as absence seizures. Absence seizures are unlike epileptic seizures where she does not convulse, but she instead experiences this losing of time, 3 to 5 seconds, where she'll essentially black out. Millions of people like Ashley suffer from this disease. There's no cure for this disease. Ashley lives in a rural part of Wisconsin outside of Lake Geneva with her sister and her mom. And in that area of the country, there are no taxis. Uber and Lyft are spotty at best. And so Ashley and many others who live up there are forced to rely on the limited public transportation options and, of course, friends and family to get them from place to place. Now, Ashley's disease is not unique, and there are millions of others of people who have other afflictions and diseases that prevent them from driving at all. Those people have to make this same choice every day, and up until this point in history, they've had no other options. So driverless cars will give millions of people who have been left out of the personal transportation revolution and the public transportation freedom that most of the people in Chicago experience, will give them a newfound freedom and a newfound level of autonomy. So this is really cool, and this is the kind of thing that we want to bring to light for you. Is it's not about incrementally making a thing better. It's about looking at the entire impact and understanding and try to predict with the best of the data and the best of intentions what the human experience is going to be like. We're going to show one more example that's more controversial to really hammer home the point.
So many of you may be familiar with different types of projects that might be going on in China and the West. What you may not have heard of is a project called Sharp Eyes, which is actually rolled out in about 55 cities and counting, and it's been built over the last 5 or 6 years. So what we're going to do is look through a couple examples. First up here, you'll see what's monitoring of an intersection. It's a pretty basic problem. You have lots of intersections in a city. What they're doing with data and AI and computer vision is actually tracking all the elements of that intersection. So think of things such as that's a truck, that's a bus, that's a person, that's a car. It's moving at a certain rate of speed. It's entering or exit the intersection. You can actually see that it's saying that this is a person of this age group, this gender. It actually identifies who the person is because all of the citizens are tracked at a central database. And with all of that information, now you have a whole nother level of granularity. And it makes you think that there's a lot of great use cases here. If you're an urban planner, if you're someone trying to figure out where the next road should go, or maybe a stoplight, now you have all this really fine-grained data to make that decision. But it makes you think a little deeper that what was the cost of that? What was the privacy implications? And that's something that we're going to have to start grappling with as the AI becomes more and more accessible. What you may want to ask yourself next time is, who owns your face? It's actually a form of PII, and it's a really interesting field of study that's going on today of, if you have a unique identification, what does that mean? Who should own that? Should you, the consumer? What if a private corporation is using it? So it makes you think about the features that we opt into possibly daily and wonder about what the long-term reasons or implications might be of that ownership. And it makes you think that overall, this is one example of many, but it's a slippery slope, and you really have to start thinking about the ethics as part of your design, why you're doing what you're doing, and who it may impact.
It's not hard to imagine this technology in the hands of a society that's run by a dictator and all the nefarious things it could be used for. But even worse, think about how enticing this system would be for bad actors, for hackers, for enemies of the state, being able to track and potentially disrupt the movement of individuals. Mm-hmm. So we've shown a few examples, starting with the very altruistic and helping people with their eyesight, all the way to potentially monitoring entire societies and enforcing social norms using artificial intelligence. These solutions really were not possible before the rise of this tech. Within that range of experiences, we showed you how there are subjective aspects. Certainly, millions of people will benefit from driverless cars, but millions of others will also be put out of work. The sharp eyes example is just the tip of the iceberg when we think about Big Brother state and the things that were prophesized in the book 1984. Now, what we want to really impress upon you is that this technology is disruptive and it's here and you should use it and not be afraid of it, but go in with eyes wide open and really try to build something that we call the best digital expression of humanity. Digital experiences that exemplify the human traits that we most admire and that we most celebrate, of fairness, compassion, and empathy. Artificial intelligence is a stand-in for human behavior. And if we don't start thinking about these things, and by the way, we've never had to think about these things in technology, not at this scale, then we run the risk of creating negative experiences or unintended outcomes and really damaging our products and our brands and ultimately our consumers, which is not at all what we want to do. So there's three things that we think you can do to start. One is form an AI ethics committee. The second is understand bias, and not just in your data, which is often a topic of discussion, but also in your processes and in your business model. And the last one will be human-centered design, and how human-centered design can not only be applied to creating the experiences that we want and bringing empathy into your design process, but it can be used across multiple domains within your organization to drive to great outcomes. So I'm going to talk about the AI Ethics Committee quickly. This is not a new concept. The Department of Defense actually publishes a set of AI ethics in regards to using AI on the battlefield. Many states and governments have already started putting in some form of ethics legislation. The GDPR actually includes a clause about explainability. So if you're going to do business in the EU, you can no longer just use a black box algorithm that spits out some sort of inference or some sort of prediction. You have to be able to explain in a court of law how that AI, how that algorithm arrived at the result. So an AI ethics committee for you would be a policy setting body. It would be a governing body. It would be listening outside of the technology for what the social norms are and defining within the span of your customers and your market what's acceptable. Where do we use this technology? When don't we use the technology? Where does bias exist in our data? And how do we guard against that from being perpetuated? AI Ethics Committee would be a transparent body and publish its policies to your users and customers, to your partners, and to your employees. It would be made up of business professionals, certainly executives, human resources people, as well as legal, risk and compliance, and of course, technologists. It should partner with your AI Center of Excellence, if you have one. AI Centers of Excellence typically focus on just making the technology work, making it sustainable, cost-effective, aligning it to the business needs, not thinking more about the ethics and about the philosophy of AI. So marrying those two together is going to be important.
The key to kind of understanding and the key to looking at whether there is bias or not is really identifying it and then trying to do things to minimize it. There's a amplifying effect to this set of technology. So in the examples that we've, sharp bias is probably the easiest one to pick on, but you can see that entire societies can be influenced and any bias that is inadvertently interjected can amplify and be used across an entire society. So there's a desire to want to minimize that, and part of that is really understanding and identifying it. And there are several ways that you can do that, and you really need to think about whether you have a cross-functional team that brings the different sets of perspective, and whether you can identify things like your own cognitive bias. So identifying is key, and then being able to do some critical thinking, some metacognition, if you will. So thinking about our thinking, to then put into steps and put into place governance that will identify and allow us to reduce some of the bias. One of the ways in which we can do that is taking a human-centered design approach, and Rob's going to talk to us about it.
This tool, this concept, this framework of human-centered design is a way in which you can systematically start to reduce bias. It's really a powerful framework for which to collaborate and iteratively design experiences and try to remove that bias and remove the errors and remove the unintended consequences from our systems and from our experiences. What we really need to take away from this, though, is that HCD isn't the cure-all for removing bias, and it is not the way to design AI solutions, but it is an interesting framework to start to execute on and start to use to test hypotheses. We use it to design digital experiences. We use it to design processes that have no digital footprint necessarily. And we also use it as a lever for innovation. It's a really interesting innovation framework for which to hypothesize, test those hypotheses, and start to then refine them.
And we'd like you to kind of take a step back and start at the beginning. So whether you've got AI solutions that are deployed or you're looking at creating your first of many to come, start at that beginning point and design with the right people in mind from the beginning, whether that's the people in your organization or the people you may be impacting. Thinking about that mindset will help your design up front. Think hard about the assumptions you might be making. We talked about bias that might be in data. There's bias in our approach. As long as you're aware and think about those things, that's your starting point. And the last thing we would say too on that is the AI Ethics Committee, you may have one or forms of one, integrate them across your enterprise. They don't work when they're just one technologist in a room. They need to be scattered. They need to have all the roles that Rob mentioned, and you can build to that over time. The key point is starting and starting early. For us, we want you to leave this talk today and take responsibility. It's our moral imperative to take these factors into heart as we approach our AI solutions.
So we truly believe that if you identify the right opportunities, identify the teams within your organization that can address those that are cross-functional, that have diversity of thinking and diversity of execution, and you take a human-centered approach, you can achieve the outcomes that you're after with this rapidly changing and powerful technology. So to us, humanistic AI is really asking the question, how will our machines make us better and enable authentic human experiences rather than simply building smart machines?